I met a little fella by the name of Warbook from the Free World League. Loud and very ugly, living his best pug life. Had him dreaming of being a much warrior pilot, sitting on his grandma's lap and he's fighting composed. The boy was shy away from nothing. That's a jag. Warbook pointed at it. I don't think it's a cat. I think this person might be my dad. That's a battle master. Oh no, excuse me, my hand slipped and destroyed by accident. Warbook destroyed me again. Warbook destroyed another lance. Like he said he would know, he didn't even apologize. Warbook did it to you. You little warpug, not like the kindest guy. Unsportsmanlike, shoot your legs and warpug die. An eye for an eye, a man 5'9" and a hateful rise. Shooting DCK players like they shot Cujo. Little pug dog with a burgundy coat. Warpug destroy me again. Warpug destroy me again. Warpug did it to you. Warpug destroyed another lands. Like he said he would, and then laughed in your face at the beginning. Warbook did it to you, and laughed in your face again. He would, and then laughed in your face at the beginning. Warbook did it to you, and laughed in your face again. Like you say he would, and then laughed in your face at the beginning. Warbook did it to you, and laughed in your face again.
Get in the hunchback.
Like he said he would. No, he didn't even apologize. Warbook did it to you, and laughed in your face again.
Warpugs. It's time. It's time for Battletech Tuesday. It's time for me to lose more faith in humanity that I didn't know I could lose. Guys, it's time for Sven van der Plank. I hope everybody is doing good. Holy crap. Oh my God. Dude, Christian, thank you, man. Only chat tonight. If you had the writing team DS9 and Stargate SG1 and actual talent resources, what would you like a Battletech TV show to focus on? Bring back all the SG1 crew into Battletech roles they would do well. Who would Richard Dean Anderson and Tapping play? Okay. First off, it would seriously be, and Christian, man, thank you so much. It would seriously be, if I could pick any time period, it would be focusing, it would have to be at least 3 to 4 seasons long. We'd have to plan that out. At least, okay? At least we'd have to plan it out that far. The first would literally be the gathering storm right before the outbreak of the First War. The second season would focus primarily on the Davians. That's where it would go from. The series would focus mostly on the Davian front, specifically the front dedicated to the actual Kuritan front, because I'd want to capture that sense of just absolute horror. The first season, though, would be focusing more on the Starleague Defense Force and the preparation for the Exodus, and the knowledge that this was all going to hell real fast. It was going downhill. It was going downhill fast and hard, okay? Now, as far as Anderson, I can't honestly say who I'd see him play. I can't honestly say who I'd see him play, but I could come up with a cast of characters for people to be played in a Battletech series. It would take me some time. I did all the Primarchs, what I would see, like my headcanon voices for them. I would like to see what I would come up with as far as a cast of characters, but the series would focus mostly on the Davian front. It would focus mostly on the Davian front. That's what I'm thinking. A few prequels that would focus on the Immortal Civil War couldn't go wrong. This is true. But what I would look at, because this is when it all goes to hell. This is when, like, that period of time is when it all really just seriously goes to hell in a handbasket. And the Centauri's massacre, the repeated attempts, like, to actually form a defensive line only to get stomped out by the Kuritans, who have been planning for this for decades. They had been planning for this to come apart for decades. So that's what I would do with it, Christian. Warpugs, how the hell are you guys doing? I just finished checking out two things. If you're an Aussie X in chat, if you're our Kiwi X in chat, I have decided that I am going to be I'm going to be attempting to do it. We still have to get some things together. One is not exactly easy to get in my neck of the woods, but the ingredients for it, I'm going to be attempting to make Anzac biscuits on Anzac Day. So I'm hoping to be able to do that. But that is not for another 2 days over here. But all that being said, soon I will have a new computer. And I am planning on diving right back into lore. I have been waiting to go back into lore. Why not, Garum? Because I don't hate myself, Captain Commander, and I don't need that fishy smell around me. I just don't. No, you can't. Don't nuke Australia, for God's sake. The animals in Australia already look like they got out of a nuclear hellscape. Okay, I'm just saying. Hey, Alan, what's up, bud? So, it's going to be an interesting couple of days for me. It's going to be an interesting couple of weeks. I'm trying to get ahead right now on my recording, so when I do get my computer, I can basically start putting things together on it. It's going to take me a while to get things up and running on the new computer. But once I get everything up and running on the new computer, when it gets here, oh yeah, I'm going right back into lore. And I'm going to be happy to do it, guys. I have been waiting to get back into lore for some time. I have not been able to really do anything. And I might take a week off of work. It might be really nice. Guys, it's time. Sven Vanderplank is about to go into following series, Fortress Tikonov, Clipped Wings, and the Darkest Hour. Let's get into it, Warpugs. It's time for War Trump. What? I can't speak English anymore. I just really can't. Okay, I lied. You should check out Science Insanity. He has great Battletech lore vids and an hour vid on Kerensky. Christian, I have when I see somebody has not been checked out before, I like to reach out to them personally to make sure that that's okay. Because even though for me, if some like massive reactor were to check out my lore videos and just garner my lore channel some attention, I would absolutely love it. But I do understand that some people do not want that at all. And I do not want to do something that's going to cause any kind of friction between me and anybody. Flat out. I'm too chill for that. I'm really too chill for that. I had an issue with that about a year and some change ago, and I just like to make sure from now on. Appreciate it, Christian. I really, really do, man. Alan, thank you, bud. What do you know about a show called Beastars? Absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. Warpugs, it's time. Let's get into this. Isaac Arthur? Fortress Tikonov.
2833 was a relatively quiet year within the coreward half of the Inner Sphere, with the only point of note being the formation of the last cowboys within the Lyran Commonwealth. The Capellan Confederation, by contrast, was a hive of activity. On the Marik front, fighting had never really paused after Blacksmith commenced. The Seacaf was able to successfully push the invaders back off Vontabren, but soon after, House Orloff launched their own offensive, Operation Stevedore. Liao struggled to mount much of a resistance as the FWLM completely eradicated the Capellan.
Cat, what are you doing? Hold on a second. What are you doing? Are you just being a cat? Yes, you are just being a cat. Never mind. The cat was catting. Alan, thank you, bud. Last I heard it was on Netflix and the last season was out. I'd have to talk to the wife about that, honestly. I'd have to talk to the wife about that. See what she wants to do. Me and her don't have a lot of time to, like, sit down and watch stuff. Like, we've been able to sit down and watch movies for a little bit, but, you know, what do you want? Come here, you. Come here. Come here. You don't get to get away now. Okay. There. Get this from around you. Now, look at the camera and be angry. Meow. Meow. Now go be a cat somewhere else. Here we go.
Capellan garrison at their primary targets, while their raiders made their own opportunistic gains after encountering minimal resistance.
Filling space is already looking smaller.
The Federated Sun's Department of Military Intelligence was analyzing the successes and failures of
She's not deaf, Joe Rogan. She's not deaf. She was trolling us the entire time.
Operation Lion the previous year, and believed their follow-up campaign, Operation Leopard, had a better chance of victory. The AWFS began by launching diversionary attacks against every commonality they bordered, while they once again called on General Greer to lead the invasion of Tikonov. The supporting actions began promisingly, already annexing 2 planets by the time the second battle for Tikonov began in May. This time, the ground forces were far more substantial, reinforced with additional artillery and aircraft.
Thank you, Alan. My kid brother's cat has adopted me as her human. This one, she can't decide what she wants. She either hates me or she loves me. She wants pets or she doesn't want anything to do with me. It is what it is.
They quickly blasted their way into the High Kremlin through a vulnerable bastion, securing the complex on the 20th. A tactical blunder by the Seacaf at Tikograd meant that they lost control of their last defensible position early in the campaign. Though the majority of the garrison escaped into the hills and proved too elusive to track down, all significant population centers were firmly under Greer's control. The arrival of the Prefectorate Guard at a pirate point on June 13th caught the Davian general unprepared.
She's on your bed.
Surgical strikes on their supply depots, coupled with a populace that was vehemently opposed to rendering any assistance, meant
cats. The war crime cat in particular. She's doing okay, guys. She's doing okay. If you were worried about her when I said she was having some health problems, we figured out what it was. She had an allergy to something she was eating. She is feeling much better now.
And that the invaders soon found themselves in an undesirable position. The MIIO was reporting a far greater Liao relief force heading their way. With their odds of success collapsing, Greer ordered his troops to withdraw.
Canned food, Mad Mergen.
Paul Davian was apoplectic at his decision to give up such a defensible position when his troops were still in good shape. the general was reassigned to work as a kitchen porter on New Syrtis for the next 18 months.
Damn. You screwed up. That's how you... Oof. Ooh.
Operation Leopard was still going on elsewhere, with the diversionary forces striking at another 2 worlds in October, capturing both by the end of the year. These 2 salients would be the sole acquisitions of the operation, however, as the other systems at Bell, Lee, and Shoreham were all held by the Capellans. Undeterred by 2 successive failures, Davian planned to make one final effort to seize Tikonov in the new year. The last actions of 2833 took place along the Marik-Liao border. The Free Worlds League launched Operation Attract, a multi-year campaign aimed at expanding the Duchy of Andurian at the Commonality's expense. Their first 2 moves against Katla and Leda went well, and the following year, Kursa and Matiskogan were added to the whole. This was not the only campaign the Captain General was initiating against the Capellan Confederation in 2834. ComStar had supplied Charles with information on the handful of systems that lay between the Duchy of Oriente and the Liao capital. Operation Hawk would hopefully establish another salient into the Cyan Commonality, from which they could launch a decisive blow against the Forbidden City on the Confederation's most important world. What should have been an easy victory turned into a rout, as unexpectedly stiff opposition drove them off all but one of the targeted planets, and a counterattack at their staging ground on Xuanyuan soon saw the system revert back to Liao control.
Another regiment destroyed, if you didn't notice.
Operation Puma was to be the Federated Sun's last attempt to seize the world of Tikonov. This time, the assault would be led by General Jessica Basna, who had successfully repulsed the attack on Chesterton back in 2828. As before, a diversionary assault would draw forces rimward, with their targets this time being along the Sarna-Capella Commonality border. The attacks began simultaneously in April, and the 2
Look at that. Another regiment destroyed. Jesus.
Capella systems fell to the Federated Suns within the month. Basna's assault proved equally promising, with all objectives bar Tikograd secured by the 4th week.
No idea, Gear.
The invaders set up for a long siege and awaited their reinforcements. While House Kurita had been rebuilding their compromised communications network, they had been eyeing up the increasingly vulnerable Draconis March along their rimward border. Paul Davian's obsession with conquering the Capellan Confederation had resulted in a great many troops being shifted over to that front. While Crucis March forces had been sent forward to fill the gaps, the defenders were still stretched thin. Somur was the only system to change hands since the code-breaking debacle.
Yeah, Christian, I can immediately see that this is going to go... We're not even close to halfway. And there's been a lot of regiments just completely wiped out. Look, 2 more right there. 2 more just completely and totally destroyed. And a lot of it is probably due to the lack of jump ships. A lot of it is probably due to the sheer lack of jump ships, where they can't even bring jump ships in the area to evacuate troops that are completely surrounded. I mean, that is horrifying. Alcius, how fitting would a battle company guardsman's name the Waffle House be in 40k, and how would it fit? It wouldn't. You assume there's such morale-raising food as waffles.
But now, Jinjiro Kurita sensed an opportunity. On August 2nd, he gave the go order for Operation Moonlight Sonata.
Oh, Jesus, really? This is going to be a prick move no matter what is said here.
Several of the strikes deep into the Crucis March had no intention of taking control of the system, but rather causing as much destruction as possible. Resistance to the invasion proved unexpectedly fierce.
Good.
Dobson and New Iverson may have fallen quickly, but the AFFS fought tooth and nail to hold on to their land everywhere else. Reinforcements sent to Barlow's End very nearly destroyed the Combine forces entirely, though they had to concede defeat in the end. Davian had only just hired on the Scrap Metal Mercenary Regiment, adding to the list of units they had to contend with. The DCMS cut their losses early and withdrew from the other systems, but Moonlight Sonata was a multi-year operation. The Dragon would soon return. While the Federated Suns had defended itself well, the attack came at the worst possible time and had far-reaching consequences. The Davian guards on Sanilac were in the middle of loading into their dropships for redeployment elsewhere when the Combine struck and inflicted horrendous casualties on the unprepared unit. The Davian guards had to abandon their mission afterwards. That mission was none other than Operation Puma, where they were set to reinforce Jessica Basna on Tikonov.
Oh no.
On July 2nd, the general learned that the aid he was counting on would not be coming. Capellan jumpships had already entered the system to spy on what forces were present, so she knew CCAF reinforcements were imminent. While they could have withdrawn into the High Kremlin and tried to wait for another Davian unit to relieve them, her light and medium mechs were not well suited for a static defense. The decision was ultimately made for her when the First Prince called for a retreat. His orders arrived just as the Northwind Highlanders did.
I see what you did there, Gearstark. I see what you did there.
Kurgawa's Blood Lancers held the line, while the Deneb Light Cavalry pulled back to their ships, but the mercenaries were completely wiped out in the effort. The old SLDF unit wouldn't have long to recuperate before they were tracked to Olmec and finished off by more of the Highlanders. The next year, Liao formed Hamilton's Highlanders from veterans of the Tikonov battles to help fortify her borders from any further Davian aggression. The third successive loss at Tikonov and the subsequent collapse of Operation Puma at Akala and Highspire heaped enormous pressure on Paul Davian at the royal court. His political opponents argued that had they sent their entire force to Tikonov during any of the three attempts, there was no doubt the Commonalty capital would now belong to the Federated Suns. The First Prince understood that such a move would have left their borders exposed to swift retaliation.
Honestly, Christian, you're right here. It is completely unfair the Capellans get the Scots. Because when I scream Scotland forever, I don't want to be sitting there supporting the Capellans at all.
Potentially losing more ground than they would gain, even with control of the massive industrial complexes in and around Tikograd. Nevertheless, he was forced to give up on his personal ambitions and take a more measured approach to the conflict. Across the Confederation, the Andurian Commonalty was still hemorrhaging worlds to House Humphrey's Operation Attract. The Free Wills League was on the charge, and that year the Marik militia reformed their 23rd Regiment, lost in the early years of the First Succession War. Word had made it back to the Captain General that the interior worlds of the Furillo province were particularly vulnerable at that moment. Jeanette Marik had passed on information about the Archon's use of citizen regiments to reinforce the front.
Yay!
The FWLM felt confident that they could bypass these and launch a series of damaging raids deep into the Commonwealth.
Okay.
Operation Brum struck at a trio of supposedly undefended systems towards the provincial capital, and ran straight into frontline combat troops that smashed the raiders before they could cause any damage.
Whoa! How did I get here?
The abject failure of Brum only added to the Captain General's growing suspicion that there was a leak somewhere in his intelligence network.
Yes, Vale.
Every operation his military undertook either led to easy victories or humiliating defeats.
So far in this one, Alcius, this doesn't seem to be a drunken bar brawl as the first one did, with only one person that wasn't drinking while everybody else was, okay? This doesn't seem to be the same level of just, we're going to throw shit at the wall until something sticks, that the first war seemed to be. This one seems like it's run a lot more, with a lot more thought process and a lot more using of the neurons firing around in Brain 1. The first Secession War was literally turn off brain, throw mechs at each other, throw nukes at cities, and throw ships at each other until we just don't have anything left. This is more tactical, in my opinion.
He tasked the head of SAFE, Morgan DeWitt, with finding those responsible. But somewhere in his mind, Charles must have feared that the actual culprit was his secret ally, ComStar. The Draconis Combine continued their deep raids into the Crucis March as part of Operation Moonlight Sonata throughout 2835.
Pretty much Mad
Their
Murder.
first target, Strawn, was all the way in the New Avalon combat region. The garrison was nearly wiped out before the DCMS withdrew just as reinforcements touched down. Listowel was next, with both sides chasing each other through the mountains before the Kuritans called it quits in July. The December raid on Shalam was the most damaging, as several industrial plants were destroyed, though the DCMS regiment was savaged in the process. The attacks had one unintended consequence that the Combine forces in that region would have to deal with going forwards.
Okay.
Chain Gang mission survivors, who had been living in the Draconis March for the past decade, declared their intent to resist further Kuritan aggression, coming together to form the Ever-Free Mercenary Regiment.
Nice!
Likewise, the AFFS also formed the Panzer Brigade that year, to further bolster the region's defense.
I hear the Steiners are screaming, and this is cultural appropriation.
The Federated Sons was not Jinjiro's only target in 2835, as Operation Chopin would also commence that year. The first phase was to hit a trio of vital industrial centers within the Tamar Pact and Federation of Sky. The fiercest fighting within each nation took place at Kobe and Kessel.
It wouldn't be effective, Alcius. It just would not be. To be honest, the A-10 would be brutally shot down by half the mechs on the field.
There, the battles descended into a true meat grinder. Though the Lyrans claimed victory both times, their heavy and assault mechs had been shown up by the more maneuverable Kuritan forces. The Draconis Combine had not lost any territory since the beginning of the war, and by all accounts should have been feeling confident about their future prospects.
Leave it be for now, Mitch.
Instead, they were entering a period of fear and uncertainty. By late 2835, Jinjiro Kurita had almost completely lost control of his psyche. Until this point, he had relied on his innate military expertise to see the realm through the tumultuous 29th century, but by now, he was barely able to function. His half-brother, Zabu Kurita, would increasingly have to step in as acting coordinator and report on developments to Jinjiro during his few lucid moments. As was the case during the First Succession War, the periphery played no significant part in the second, probably even less so. The only notable development came in 2835, when tensions within the Outworlds Alliance broke the nation in two. The Spinward half of the realm was largely populated by immigrants from the Terran hegemony.
Kirk would have an urban mech with the AC-20 because he's a big fucking troll. Cisco would have a Marauder.
Settled during the heady days of the Star League. Though they maintained a civil relationship with the older colonists, of whom many had died fighting their ancestors in the Reunification War, the periphery uprising that precipitated the fall of the Star League divided the Alliance into two camps. When the Alpharat's government seemed unwilling or unable to stave off the pirates preying on the outermost colonies, which had already led to the abandonment of more than 24 worlds, Trader's Domain decided that enough was enough. Led by the provincial capital Wind's Roost, in 2835 they declared themselves an independent state, no longer part of House Avalar territory.
Okay.
Trader's Domain faced an uphill battle, as evidenced by the fact that the Alliance military corps would lose both their Balagora defenders.
Oh, God. I'm just seeing destroyed constantly. Gearstark, thanks, bud. There's an A-10 style aerospace fighter known as the Mech Buster armed with an AC-20. How does it fire the damn thing without basically stopping in midair? That's the big question for me. Oh, is it Civil War time? Hooray, it's Civil War time!
And the remote regards to pirate activity during the Second Succession War, and the new microstate had far less in the way of defences. The internecine fighting that plagued the region would infect their own systems in due course. Survival on the fringes of human space might soon prove too great a challenge. Since the end of the Davian Big Cat offensives, Duke Damian Hasek had been conducting his own private war against the Confederation, Operation Tiger. This was nothing more than a widespread raiding campaign, beginning in late 2834 and continuing into 37.
Stephanie, no kid.
It proved effective in keeping the CCAF on the defensive, and at no point did Chancellor Liao have the opportunity to reclaim any of the worlds she had lost to the Capellan March. The Bloody Suns were favourites of his, dispatched to Galitzin and even the commonalty capital, St. Ives. Two systems were affected by the raids more than the others, Genf and Kai. The attacks proved to be the death knell for both colonies. Neither would survive the war.
Oh my god.
Across on the other side of the Confederation, Operation Attract was concluding with the capture of Viribium and Aquagia. In both instances, the CCAF had given Duke Jonathan Humphrey's forces a bloody nose before withdrawing, enough for them to think twice about continuing the campaign.
Wait. Let me just back it up 10 seconds. There we go.
In both instances, the CCAF had given Duke Jonathan...
That face when you see a spider.
Humphrey's forces a bloody nose before withdrawing, enough for them to think twice about continuing the campaign.
Oh shit! It's a wrap!
The last move in the region came when the Free World's guards seized a great bounty of spare parts from the mech factories on Shiro 3.
Okay, nice.
2836 also saw the last actions of Moonlight Sonata, with 2 raids into the Woodbine operational area and a hard-won victory over the Draconis March militia on Tishamingo. The DCMS had largely discounted the garrison as posing any real threat, but they fought so tenaciously that the 17 survivors were treated more like heroes than prisoners of war after the fighting concluded. Not knowing when the assault would cease, the Robinson Rangers raised a 2nd regiment that year to help in the defense of their homeworld. Operation Chopin would also move towards its climactic finale in 2836, the 4th Battle of Hesperus.
Yeah, there we go.
As grand as a return to this hyper-industrial planet sounded on paper, in reality, the assault force led by Taisho Satoshi Anderson stood little chance of success. Fewer units were dispatched than had taken part in the infamous First Battle, and by 2837, the Taisho was preparing to deploy nuclear weapons in a last-ditch effort to achieve his objectives. Zabu Kurita instead refused his request to use WMDs, forcing the DCMS to withdraw. Anderson's decision.
Somebody using common sense. And it's a Kuritan on top of it. When does it go down to hell? Because it's coming. We all know it's coming. We all know it's coming. It's going to happen.
To commit seppuku upon his return proved a rallying cry for the warlords of the Draconis Combine.
There we go.
In their estimation, Zabu lacked the guts needed to make the tough calls.
Yay!
If he were to succeed Jinjiro as coordinator, which looked likely, the fate of the realm would be in jeopardy. They would need to take action.
Oh! Hit the like button if you would, everybody, and get ready. Here we go. The Kuritans are about to go chew some 5 gum. It's about to happen. Let's go. Here we go. clipped wings. Ooh. Yeah, this sounds like Federated Sons are about to get pounded. Not Federated Sons, Free Worlds League. I'm an idiot.
2837. Captain General Charles Marik was approached by the director of SAFE, Morgan DeWitt.
Okay.
His efforts to root out the leak within their intelligence network had come up short, and he was forced to conclude that the issue lay elsewhere.
Oh.
Reviewing the successes and failures of their operations since entering the Second Succession War, Charles could see no obvious pattern to link them, which ultimately led him to question the information he was receiving from ComStar via his sister Jeanette, the presenter of Oriente. His worst fear was that ComStar was passing information to his enemies as often as they were to him. With the utmost secrecy, he ordered DeWitt to orchestrate Operation Cookie Jar.
This could not be more ill-fately named.
On February 1st, the Captain General arrived on Oriente, ostensibly for a meeting with Duke Harlan Allison, but while there, he would also make a surreptitious visit to see his sister, the Precentor. In that later conversation, he dropped hints towards a discovery on the recently conquered Cursa, but did not elaborate beyond that. Meanwhile, dropships were departing from that world bearing a classified heavy cargo.
Am I about to watch one of them? Alright, look. Just X in chat if you think, if you don't know, and if you know, if I'm about to watch an ass whipping that will live on for generations. Because I got a feeling I'm about to watch an ass whipping that's going to live on for generations. I got a feeling I'm about to watch an absolute curb stomping.
Communications back to Atreus via the orbital HPG station at Oriente, using codes that SAFE knew had been compromised by ComStar, spoke of an SLDF warehouse stocked with Starleague-era tech, the likes of which was near extinct following the widespread destruction of the First Succession War.
Oh God.
The trap was set. The Free Worlds League military was not idle while they waited for ComStar to take the bait. In fact, they were busy trying to repel a sweeping Liao counteroffensive in the early months of 2837, largely focused within the Duchy of Andurian. Though Duke Jonathan Humphreys managed to secure Karlstein,
oh shit! It's a wrap!
He faced a sudden reversal in fortune when the Seacaf arrived at Ithaca, Leda, Mataskogan, and Veribium. Further up the line,
that face when you step into the glowy portal and there's some pretty looking girl there who has pointy ears and is wearing a lot of leather, and she says to you the following: "Welcome to Kamara."
Karlstein. He faced a sudden reversal in fortune when the Seacaf arrived at Ithaca, Leda, Mataskogan, and Veribium. Further up the line, the Capella commonality reclaimed Bithynia and Propus, and the Tikonov commonality Bellevue, Mancalanan, and Orenson, though here the losses were offset by the successful capture of the major factory world of Ascension.
Another destroyed regiment, my God!
Across the Inner Sphere on February 14th, a gift was delivered to Jinjiro Kurita's chambers within Unity Palace on
This guy, Christian, thank you so much, bud. If you think that face is bad, there's much worse art. Alan, you have a great night. Mad Mergan, get yourself some more coffee. This piece of art right here, this man is looking around right now, and the expression on this face says the following: I'm going to drink a glass of milk, and then I'm going to go take a fantastic shit. That's this face right here. Followed by him spending about 20 minutes arguing with people on Twitter. That's this face.
Luthien. The ISF carried out extensive security checks on it to ensure that it contained no hidden threats to their coordinator before handing it over. There were no chemicals, explosives, or radiological hazards present, but there was one danger they overlooked. a psychological one.
Oh god.
When Jinjiro opened the parcel and found within a toy soldier dressed in the uniform of the Star League Defense Force, he flew into a psychotic frenzy from which he would never escape. His half-brother, Zabu Kurita, was ultimately forced to call riot police into the palace in order to restrain him. Zabu's ascension to the position of coordinator was not without objection. Several within his family urged for the position to instead pass to one of his heirs, if only to appease the mustard soldiery with whom Zabu was not held in high regard. However, each of his children, Yoguchi, Rowena, and Miyogi, spoke in favor of their father. The deed was done, and the Combine would have to wait and see what manner of ruler he would be. Questions remain.
I doubt they're gonna wait long.
As to who was behind the doll that sent Jinjiro over the edge. No one has ever been definitively linked to the gift. Speculation has ranged from foreign intelligence agencies to another of ComStar's plots. But
imagine if it was like a kid being like, I found a thing of your great-great-great-grandfather. Oh, that's so sweet. Opens it up. There it is. Hooray. Kerensky is the Undertaker in that one meme. Yes, I know exactly what you're talking about.
More convincingly, a member of the Kurita family. Could the Coordinator's half-brother have intentionally broken Jinjiro's mind, knowing how the Minnesota tribe had terrified him a decade earlier? It seems out of character, but not beyond question. Every one of Zabu's children would also play an important part in Draconis Combine history. We won't get ahead of ourselves by discussing them now, but suffice to say that each took a step closer towards their end goal with Jinjiro's removal. Back at Atreus, Charles Marik was waiting for news of what felt at this point like an inevitable betrayal. Sure enough, on March 13th, the Capellan Confederation Armed Forces arrived in force on Cursa with 3 regiments. Bypassing the actual military and industrial targets, they instead beelined straight for the remote location used by the cargo dropships in their ruse. Needless to say, there was no Starlink cache waiting for them. It was now known beyond a doubt that ComStar was manipulating the successor states into pointless battles that served only to make the great houses weaker. The Captain General's response was immediate. He dispatched his few remaining warships to Oriente, and on the 22nd, ordered them to bombard the orbiting HPG station into oblivion.
Oh!
300.
You touched the wireless tower. You have chosen death. Alkios, you're very, very accurate.
100 were killed within the complex, his sister Jeanette included.
Dude, you are now a kinslayer.
Word of the incident reached Primus Conrad Toyama 3 days later. This was,
and now the Amish rise.
The first direct challenge to ComStar since their founding. If he did not act quickly, their monopoly on interstellar communications could collapse, and the successor states might halt the war before his goal of dismantling their militaries could be achieved. Toyama was decisive in his next action. He issued a shunning proclamation to all HPG stations. Exclusion Order 2837/1.
Nice.
Henceforth, the Freewells League was placed under a complete communications interdiction. The effect of this was disastrous to the wartime economy and governance of the successor state.
Yay.
Cutting off Tharkad back in 2823 had been damaging, but to shut down every HPG within a realm was ruinous. Sabotage prevented the Freewells League from being able to restart the stations themselves. The adepts and presenters within their realm disappeared into hiding, and those few safe turned up could not be made to work for them.
Nice. You have angered the space wizards of AT&T. How do you plead?
The Capellan Confederation and Lyran Commonwealth were at first uncertain as to how to proceed. It was unclear how ComStar would react to them taking hostile actions against a realm under interdiction. When Liao raids did not bring about any condemnation from Toyama, Steiner reasoned that other states were free to move into Marik territory. The LCAF didn't initially have the troops available, and instead rapidly expanded their citizen regiments to free up border garrisons for the assault.
There we go.
Their immediate aim was to cut off the Freewells League from Terra before access to the HBG network was restored, starting with assaults in late April against Graham and Oliver.
It's free real estate. Yes, Cleodora.
Both planets fell quickly. While these battles were still ongoing, Liao and Steiner were frantically making preparations for a much larger invasion to begin in the autumn. Toyama believed that 6 months of isolation would be enough to bring the Freewells League to its knees. For violating the Communications Protocol of 2787, he demanded that Marik make reparations to the tune of 3 times the cost of rebuilding the Oriente HBG station. During this period, Rom and Safe engaged in a shadow war, as each tried to subvert the other's efforts to enforce or contravene the communications interdiction. But the Captain General proved unexpectedly recalcitrant and refused to submit to Toyama. With the other successor states gearing up for a campaign that would surely demolish the Freewells League should it go ahead, ComStar found itself in the awkward position of having to actually supply intelligence to the frontline FWLM units to warn them of the incoming threat.
Yeah.
Hopefully, they could hold out long enough for their leader to see the error of his ways and back down.
Daddy's not mad, he's just disappointed. Get the picture?
In August, the invasion got underway along both fronts, and yet Charles Marik had still not yielded. By late September, Toyama called a halt to Rom's involvement in the ComStar War. The collapse of one of the successor states could seriously disrupt the balance of power and work counter to his long-term aims. But
no, Mordrick, the ComStar is basically sitting there like, we want to cripple them, we don't want them to fall, we just want them weak as shit.
The exclusion order had to remain in place, as its removal could set a dangerous precedent that the other great houses would surely exploit. These were nerve-wracking times for the Primus.
Oh yeah, for him, definitely.
The Lyrans opened with 2 separate thrusts. Quick-thinking Marik commanders had taken the initiative to strike at suspected staging posts, delaying the invasion and buying them vital time. They even managed to briefly take control of Zosma, but the Steiner assault was all but inevitable. Irion was the first target within the Dixie salient they hit. Then from there, they moved to Malazan. Towards Terra, they landed on Borden, Callison, Marcus, and Zosma. The Capellans pushed in at 3 locations along the border. A trio of systems recently taken by Task Force Hammer were counterattacked: Berenson, Kirkbakken, and Zion. The 3 most spinward planets of Kenyan salient were also hit: Kori, Fact, and Wazan, while the Duchy of Andurian came under attack at Claybrook, Lopez, and their capital.
Nice.
Some of these had only been intended as raids, but the defense was so disorganized that only on Andurian did the Freewells League successfully hold onto its territory.
Wow.
Faced with imminent disaster, Captain General Charles Marik ordered one of the most desperate and demoralizing commands any successor lord has ever given.
I can't really say that, like, essentially ComStar took one look at the Freewells League, said, okay, you want to mess around, you want to play with my toys, which you are one of my toys. I'm going to take you from the Age of Information all the way back to the Age of Sail. Have a nice day. That's what happened here. That is exactly what happened here. Because without the HPG network, quite simply put, you are reliant on jump ships to relay information. Oh, I know, Andrew.
Every unit within the FWLM occupying foreign territory was to withdraw to their Stali Gira defensive lines.
Oh, wow.
A feeding frenzy ensued as both the Commonwealth and Confederation gorged themselves on the abandoned territories. The remainder of the Dixie salient was given back, as were several of the jointly administered planets along the old hegemony border. The commonalities gained far more, Tikonov taking 6 systems, Sana 5, Capella 2, while Cyan and Andurian took 3 each.
Oh.
All of these were former Confederation holdings during the era of the Star League. Chancellor Liao initially encouraged her forces to press onwards, but securing the territory behind them seemed the smarter move. Vincent's commandos briefly seized Ling and drove off a counterattack by the League's new mercenary unit, Nathan's Irregulars, but they were soon withdrawn to safer ground. Charles Marik has the unfortunate distinction of being the man behind the greatest loss of territory in Freewell's League history. Only the duchies of Andurian and Orloff made significant efforts to hold on to their hard-won gains from the previous 5 decades.
How much of a death sentence is relying only on messenger boys when your enemies have phones? Drastic. Kenyon Merrick is smugging in his grave right now. No, like, Mitch, I quite literally meant the information age to the information age to the age of sail. That's quite literally what I meant. It's that much of a technology gap at that point. When you can't communicate instantaneously, you might as well be in that position. You might as well be in that position because you're dealing with people who are able to, at a moment's notice, communicate over vast distances, and the best that you have is relying on a ship going from place to place to relay the same information and information change and essentially Chinese whispers on a governmental scale. It's terrible.
Liao would no doubt be turning towards them soon. The Captain General was crucified in Parliament for his decision, but with hindsight, we can see how the sudden influx of new systems to administer took the wind out of their opponent's sails. Guerrilla forces left behind by Marik did not make their lives easy. It took time for them to reorganize, time the FWLM would need to set up new defensive lines themselves. Not all of the Marik regiments would get that chance, as several never even received the recall orders and died stranded far ahead of the new border. Back in the Draconis Combine, things were coming to a head over Zabu Kurita's rule. On June 9th, 2838, he presented in court the budget for the next year. As coordinator of the People's Reconstruction effort, Zabu was well aware of how technology was slipping away. Medical procedures that had been commonplace during the Star League might as well have been magic acts just half a century on. He wanted more funds to reverse this decline. In his budget was a modest 4% reduction in military spending.
You can't do that in the Combine.
Was the final straw for the DCMS High Strategic Council. In a meeting 3 days later, they agreed that the only course of action available to them was the removal of the coordinator.
There we go.
Taisho Frederick Kazoma of the Procurement Evaluation Board was chosen for the honor. On June 23rd, he entered Zabu's bedchambers and drew his sword. Kurita was unperturbed. After asking whether the Taisho was acting alone, and being informed that he was in fact there on behalf of the High Council, Zabu Kurita accepted his fate. With Kazoma's blessing, he dressed in full ceremonial garb, wrote the traditional House Kurita death haiku, took one of his family's ancient wakizashi in hand, then drew it across his stomach. Frederick Kazoma then delivered the coup de grace. No action was ever taken to chastise the military afterwards for their assassination plot. Only Kazoma was sentenced to death for striking the killing blow, though even this proved contentious.
Yeah. At least he went out well. He knew it was going to happen. He didn't cry about it. He didn't bitch. He didn't moan. It was done. It was a $20 Amazon katana folded 10,000 times. Yeah, there you go, Chris.
Political pressure on Charles Marik was ramping up in 2838. Parliament believed that his stubbornness in admitting fault to ComStar was about to bring the Free Worlds League to ruin. Efforts to explain Toyama's duplicity fell on deaf ears. Opposition coalesced around Minister of Finance Hector Lombard, who planned to use what little power they still had post-Resolution 288 to bring the Captain General to heel. On June 24th, they blocked Marik's proposed budget that would allow him to raise 5 new regiments to face off against the threat. They would not approve the bill until Charles made reparations towards ComStar.
Alkis, you have a nice
the reformed 13th Marik Militia got off the ground that year. The infighting came at the worst time for the FWLM, who had once again come under assault from the LCAF in May. One of Steiner's main objectives was to push towards the wealthy shipbuilding world of Tamarind.
Ooh.
To that end, they took 6 planets from Marik control in preparation for an assault the next year. Closer to Terra, they pushed into the Stuart Commonality for the first time to take Tania Borealis, as well as the nearby Connaught, then the exposed Shiloh in August. It had taken the Capellan Confederation longer to get their affairs in order, chiefly because they were still dealing with the final actions of Operation Tiger in 2837. Apart from a raid on Andurian in January and eradicating some of the Orlov Grenadiers who had fled to Susano, it wasn't until the mid-year that they began moving in force. Another trio of systems were taken back from Duke Jonathan Humphreys. An embarrassing side effect of the interdiction was that several mercenary contracts were about to expire when the edict came into effect, and the Free Worlds League was unable to renew them through the ubiquitous Mercenary Review Board. Sensing which way the winds were blowing, those on Bonaire willingly went over to Liao, taking the planet with them.
Oh, damn. Oh, damn. This is another incident of pay your bills.
Van Diemen was one of the worst losses for Duke Harlan Allison. Though he would later rebuild it, one of his prize Fusiliers of Oriente brigades was destroyed, along with 5 supporting Marik militia battalions.
Exactly, Andrew.
Both of Harlan's sons are listed as casualties of the ComStar War. They most likely met their fate during this battle. Liao had little time to celebrate their victory. Before year's end, the system would change hands again, this time going to the Commonwealth.
There we go.
Steiner and Liao were not the only ones salivating over juicy targets within the Free Worlds League. In 2838, Davian and Kurita got in on the action. Amusingly, they came...
Christian, thank you, man. I appreciate it, bud. I really, really, really do. Last one, thanks for the vids, man. I've had some tough pain lately, and seeing you get into Battletech makes me smile. Welcome to my favorite sci-fi that I've been in for 20 years. Christian, I am going to be doing my first ever non-40K lore video. Once I get my new computer, the writing process has already started. For those of you who recommended the Humble Bundle to me, I got it. I have Battletech source books now, and I am going to put those to use. Prepare for screaming. A lot of screaming. A lot of screaming. Yes! Christian, I'm glad I'm able to be here. Like, this is the thing for being me. You don't know you don't know what people are going through. And, you know, a lot of people are enjoying themselves. 71, it's still going on. It's still going on. It's actually still happening. Oh, pretty much the same. Pretty much the same there. Yeah, it's still going on. It's still going on at 71. There's another Humble Bundle on for Battletech right now. I believe it's the same one. I believe they extended it. But it's going on for another 4 days. If I ever get MechWarrior 5 Clans or play MechWarrior Online, you roll with me. If you're... JR, I do have MechWarrior. I I'd have to remember my account name for MechWarrior Online. Just saying. There's more books. But the thing about this, I can't wait to get into it. Like, I seriously cannot wait to get into it. Warpugs, thank you so much for joining me, like, in this. Christian, thank you very much, man. I'm glad I could be there for you. Let's get into this.
To blows with each other more often than they did the natives. Alula Australis was one of the planets the Lyrans had planned to take, but a 6-week battle with the AFFS left both forces incapable of achieving their objectives, leaving the world as the sole surviving system within the Border Protectorate. Those on New Dallas saw a familiar sight of the succession wars in an unusual locale.
Thank you, Christian, again, man. Good. Give in to the stompy mechs. I can't wait for your Battletech vids. Hopefully you start with my favorite Russian, Kerensky. I already have an idea of who I'm going to start with. And it's going to be less of Kerensky himself. I'm going to have fun. I'm going to have fun. Let's just say it like that. I'm going to enjoy myself. Thank you, Christian. Really.
The Fed Sons and Capellans going
Kenyan
at
Marik.
it over what few resources of value were left on that nuclear-scarred world. The population of Talitha.
In some point, I've already decided I'm going to make a preview of the first Battletech video. I'm going to make a preview of the Battletech video. And I already have an outline drawn up, so it's going to be fun.
Kurita also watched with bemusement as distant foes, the AFFS and DCMS, landed in September, then fought one another for the opportunity to steal anything of value before lifting off 2 months later.
I will tell you guys this. I have put together an award that I am going to be giving to people within Battletech. Yeah.
Those Proserpina Hussars dispatched to Christensen didn't even realize that the system had already been claimed by the Capellans until they made landfall. Following Zabu Kurita's death, the title of Coordinator, as well as that of First Lord of the Star League, passed on to his eldest son Yuguchi. He was already a respected officer within the Mustard Soldiery, which gave him a firm foundation from which to rebuild trust with the military district warlords. Wasting little time, in August 2838, Coordinator Yuguchi commenced the 5th Battle of Hesperus. A total of 7 regiments, 2 of which were battlemech commands, made landfall on the planet, while a trio of warships secured the space lanes overhead. Their numbers allowed them to quickly take control of the planet's main population centers, leaving only the fortified mountain complexes in Steiner hands.
Oh my god, finally!
The siege they had planned went both ways, however. It was extremely difficult for the Draconis Combine to resupply their positions so deep into the Lyran Commonwealth. Unable to force an opening, the DCMS ultimately withdrew. Yuguchi, like his father before him, had outlawed the use of nuclear weapons to raise the factories. Zabu had imparted on his son those same concerns about a technological decline, and he did not wish to add to it, even if those mechs would ultimately be used against him. Despite their failure, the expedition to Hesperus boosted morale within the DCMS and secured the new coordinator's position. Long term, they would return to the planet once again to finish the job.
Never heard of that channel, Christian. Never heard of it.
Freeworld's parliament had reached a complete stalemate by this point. The MPs had realized that while Resolution 288 had given Marik the right to declare war or make peace, they still held considerable influence over him by manipulating the purse strings. They could, in effect, make the continuation of war impossible. Hector Lombard's faction had blocked a move by the Captain General to conscript more forces, and then another bill on August 9th, this time to press merchant jump ships into service as messengers as a way to avoid giving in to ComStar.
Yeah.
The political pressure finally proved too much for Charles. On September 19th, he begrudgingly dispatched his son Garth aboard FWLS Dark Regret to Terra. There, he was called before the entire First Circuit. Toyama demanded that the Free Wills League be made to pay far beyond the original sum outlined in the exclusion order, but Garth held firm. Marik would pay the exact amount and nothing more. After a few weeks of bitter discourse, the two sides agreed to a truce in mid-October. On November 9th, ComStar lifted their communications interdiction. 70% of the League's HPG stations came back online, with the rest up and running by year's end.
Huh. Wow.
Only Oriente would remain cut off for the next 3 years, while ComStar rebuilt the facility. Toyama decreed that all future installations would be secure compounds built to withstand attack.
Hesperus is not the Armageddon of Battletech. I would not say Hesperus is the Armageddon of Battletech, and the reason I would say that is primarily because there has been several battles there, but Armageddon, despite it having many wars waged on it, has only been involved in 4 major conflicts, okay? The 4 major conflicts of Armageddon were, in no particular order, First, Second, Third War of Armageddon, with Chaos and Double the Orcs, and then, for those of you who are trying to figure it out, or who don't know, the first technical war of Armageddon was when the Emperor and several of the Primarchs assaulted Ullanor, because Ullanor is Armageddon. So there's only been 4 major wars on Armageddon. It has not been a centerpiece of any main, it has not been a centerpiece of conflict. That's been a more recent development. I would say Hesperus is more of Steiner's Cadia, because that's pretty much what it is, okay? It would be their Cadia. The War of the Beast, yeah, true, but at the same time, it's not, like, I would say it's not really that, yeah, exactly, Point Man Frosty, you said it best. Hesperus is a trap, it grinds down the invaders. Same thing for Cadia. Same thing for Cadia. Now, if Hesperus gets destroyed at some point, then it's definitely Cadia.
It was only once the Captain General's vision was restored that he realized just how bad his situation was.
Oh.
Doing his best to triage what was left of his defensive
65 systems lost. Oh. Oh, God. X in chat to nuke Joe Rogan.
Line. He recalled his forces from 5 systems along the Lyran border that he deemed either beyond saving or simply not worth the effort. While he still could, he dispatched the Regulan Hussars to strike at the mech factories on Kava, hoping that it would prevent the Seacath from cutting their vital Terran corridor. The Capellan Confederation armed forces were engaged elsewhere, however. Sensing that the end of the interdiction was imminent, they launched in October a major effort to retake Andurian. A pair of warships led the assault force, CCS Chengdu and Kalzan. Though the latter took damage during the battle at the Zenith, their incredible power cleared a path through half a dozen dropships, 40 aerospace fighters, and several heavy weapons emplacements. As they scanned the system though, they realized that in orbit over the target world were 2 enormous Marik vessels, FWLS Kumba and Majestic. Another 2 warships were at more distant stations, meaning that the Seacath's only chance was to blast their way through the defenses at the capital before they were too heavily outnumbered. Their next engagement did not go well. 20% of their ground forces were destroyed before even making landfall, and the 2 Capellan warships were both annihilated.
Dude! F in chat for Capella's Navy, because it's getting close to being non-existent at this point.
though not without at least taking the Atreus-class Majestic with them, the last of these venerable Free Worlds battleships. Only 2 regiments had touched down in an organized fashion, the rest widely dispersed across the planet.
Oh God. Dude, I am under the full and unrequited belief that the Capellans would really want this shit back, because damn.
With a trio of mech units in garrison, there was little hope of success now. After trying in vain for 9 weeks to seize the capital, they eventually withdrew on December 29th.
Oh, they want this one back. They want to load a quick save after that shit.
The ComStar War is one of the darkest chapters in Free Worlds League history. Though the dispute between Marik and Toyama had been resolved at a public level, behind the scenes, neither side would ever trust the other again. Any ambitions the 2 men might have had to take control of the other faction had gone up in smoke. Whether either of them could recover from this defeat was unclear.
Oh man. Look how much the Free Worlds League just shrunk. It's almost, no, it's probably smaller than the Capellans now.
On April 17th, 2839, Conrad Toyama, Primus of ComStar, suffered a fatal stroke. He passed away that same day. His body was cremated, and his ashes were entombed within the ruins of Unity City on Terra.
Okay.
Toyama's death severed one of the very last links to the old Star League. By war's end, there would be none alive who still remembered life during humanity's golden age.
Okay.
Shortly before his passing, Raymond Karpov, presenter Alpha Centauri and member of the First Circuit, had been named Toyama's successor. The proximity of this announcement to the Primus's death have naturally led many to speculate the 2 were connected.
Really?
Similar rumours had perpetuated following Conrad's takeover after Blake's demise.
All hail the blistering Amish!
There's no way to know for certain if Raymond had a hand in his mentor's death, but there was a possible motive. ComStar records show that the First Circuit was increasingly concerned that the successor states were losing confidence in their neutrality following the Shadow War with the Free Worlds League. Though Captain General Charles Marik had withdrawn the accusations that he had been double-crossed, the suggestion that they could not be trusted lingered, and it clung to Toyama most. Karpov perhaps felt that removing the Primus was the only way to ensure that the organization did not continue to slide backwards. For Raymond Karpov, ComStar truly was a sacred order.
And at this point, if a single Emperor-class battleship showed up, it would wipe out the entirety of this setting. If a single Emperor-class battleship showed up, that's how screwed they are.
Any history of the era frequently describes him as a fanatic, a true believer in the word of Blake.
Yes, the word of the Amish.
Toyama may have instituted the changes in doctrine that his master requested in order to reform it into a pseudo-religion, but it was the new Primus that really cemented it as a theocratic institution. His first move was to name Conrad a saint, placing him up on a pedestal alongside the Blessed Founder. But he went much further. Henceforth, all members of the ComStar Order were to wear robes adorned with symbols relating to mathematics, theoretical physics, or mechanical principles.
From the moment I understood the frailty of my flesh,
they were to perform chants and incantations before operating the sacred hyperpulse generators, or any machinery considered suitably holy. Karpov's changes would ironically bring about the cognitive atrophy that Blake had envisioned within the very society who was supposed to safeguard that knowledge. Of course, those on Terra hoarded that information and technical understanding for themselves, but the adepts and even presenters of foreign realms comprehended the technology around them less and less with each passing year. This proved an effective safeguard against any of the successor states trying to subvert their operations. These radical changes did not go on.
Hey Avalon, we're watching AT&T become toaster lovers. How are you doing? How's Sevatar?
Unchallenged. 2 members of the First Circuit walked out in protest, but this only allowed Karpov to replace them with loyal stooges.
Hey Eleanor.
It was Organizational Edict 3056 which caused the biggest stir within ComStar. ROM was to be expanded from an internal security agency to a militant branch of the Order, tasked with hunting down and killing any individual whose work might halt the technological decline of the successor states.
The only question now is when do we get the militant wing of the Salvation Army?
Presenter ROM Michelle Dupree was outraged by the change in our organization's mandate.
Cool.
She would not back down, and ended up resigning within 24 hours of the edict coming into effect. Her replacement, Janice Laidlaw, saw to it that Dupree would suffer a fatal traffic accident 5 days later.
Great.
With his opposition removed and the loyal Laidlaw at his side, Primus Raymond Karpov ordered the commencement of Operation Holy Shroud. A list of targeted institutions and individuals were dispatched to ROM teams across the Inner Sphere for them to eliminate. Universities were frequent targets of sabotage or even bombings. More specific examples include FTL communication research in the Federated Suns and Light and Commonwealth efforts to recover ferrofibrous technology, both of which were completely destroyed by ROM.
Oh,
the ComStar War had necessitated the Freewells League launching their own HPG projects. Any and all information pertaining to this was eradicated by Karpov's fanatics. The First Succession War had resulted in the disappearance of many of the Star League's most advanced technologies from the Inner Sphere. These were subsequently dubbed Lost Tech, and functional examples in the modern era are exceedingly rare, if not altogether extinct.
Once again, I'm reminded of when I sat there and I was wondering how so much of, Battletech's like technology, how so much of their advancements, so much knowledge disappeared, and now we understand why.
The Second Succession War had already seen even moderately sophisticated computer equipment drop out of use. Laidlaw's efforts saw this trend continue. The raids were undertaken with the utmost caution to ensure that they could not be traced back to ComStar. With war raging on every front, it wasn't difficult to pin the blame on the neighbouring successor states or internal extremist groups. Another of the casualties was the compact Kearney Fushida drive, the advanced jump cores around which warships were built. By this point, there were at most 24 such vessels still in service.
It's over.
But the destruction of the few shipyards sufficiently sophisticated enough to maintain them, and the wholesale murder of those engineers who possessed the knowledge to construct them, guaranteed that warships would soon vanish into the history books.
It's over.
ROM's actions were not limited to military technology either. Commercial, industrial, and medical sectors had already been badly affected by the wars, as academics were conscripted for military projects. Holy Shroud had no qualms about continuing their decline, hitting them just as hard. Countless thousands, if not millions, have died in the centuries since that might have been saved had the Presenter and our Primus not been so thorough in their reversal of human advancement.
Oh, wow.
One of ROM's most secretive objectives was to hunt for and recover any lost SLDF caches. These pre-war installations contain not just military materiel, but a wealth of knowledge that might be used to halt the technological nosedive. Whenever an installation was uncovered, ComStar would relocate the weapons within to their vast warehouses on Terra, and either hoard or destroy the computer archives as appropriate. People today in 3025 often speculate on what effect uncovering a functional memory core would have on the war-torn successor states.
Dude, it's just like STCs. Like, I just wondered why. This was ugly. This was just ugly. This was on the level of the burning of the Library of Alexandria. This was so horrific. No wonder the clans just simply rolled over everything. No wonder the clans just simply rolled over everything. No, Christian, I don't think so. I do not think the Mechanicus would look at what ComStar is doing with just disgust. With absolute disgust. The Mechanicus would not approve of what ComStar is doing. They would quite simply try to kill them all because of what they're doing. The Mechanicus doesn't know how to make new technology, but they are very, very, very protective of the technology that they have. Like, extremely protective of it. They will go to extreme lengths to protect even the most basic, technological innovations that are still there. They just don't know how to make it anymore. They really don't. That is so that is so hideous. That is just hideous.
Holy Shroud would run until 2845. During that time, ComStar successfully assassinated more than 300 of the best scientific minds in the Inner Sphere. Professors, teachers, and researchers that would be sorely missed in the coming years. ComStar's systematic dismantling of advanced technology was going on behind the scenes while the successor states were still duking it out along every front. The Freewells League had been on the back foot for the past 2 years and would struggle to turn their fortunes around. Thankfully, they did not exist in isolation, and aggression on the part of more distant realms into the exposed flanks of their more immediate neighbours would stem the flow of forces pouring into Marik territory. First to come under assault from an unexpected aggressor had been the Lyran Commonwealth. In a repeat of events following the Second Battle of Hesperus, the armed forces of the Federated Suns had raided Steiner systems around Terra. New Earth and Menkent were hit back in December 2838, then Summer, Thorin, and Miser in March. Some minor payback would come in the spring when the LCAF landed on Castor and Alphard, both of which were currently being ransacked by the AFFS and DCMS respectively.
And they hate each other so much that this is happening right underneath their noses, and they just simply do not notice it. The only one that really never noticed something was wrong was the Freeworlds League. And they hate each other so much they just simply didn't pay attention to it. They heard the warning, but they didn't pay heed, and around them all society burned. Unbelievable. That is unbelievable. Good God. Just safer than the Captain General? Well, the Captain General was up there saying what happened, and everybody was just like, no, we've got to continue these wars against the Capellans and the Steiners. Oh.
The two systems would submit to Lyran rule soon after. 3 other nearby systems were also seized by House Steiner. Further along the border, another turncoat mercenary group took the planet Rexburg over to the Commonwealth. The LCAF focus in that region was on Tamarind. They began their assault in April, but came up against stiff opposition within the capital Padron City,
Not really,
the so-called Venice of Tamarind. The layout of the canals served as a series of bottlenecks the defenders took full advantage of. Steiner abandoned their efforts on May 11th, and instead began preparing for new offensives elsewhere. Liao.
This is so much more tragic than the First War. Even though we haven't had the repeated stories of absolute, like, planet-wide massacres, WMD usage on civilian populations, everything, even though it hasn't been said, this loss of knowledge is so much worse in the long run.
Liao was also facing aggression from their far side that would prevent them from making as much progress into the crumbling Free Worlds League as they might have liked. Leading these raids were the recently expanded 4th Certis Fusiliers. After the marriage of Damien Hassick and Margaret Ross the previous June, the veterans of her bloody sons had been folded into the unit, bringing it back up to full strength. Most of the 5 targets Davian was going after were already considered too far gone to be worth putting up a fight over, and so they cut their losses rather than divert troops away from their primary objective. Capellan actions that year were focused around the Duchy of Andurian. Successful attacks against Karlstein and Katla kept nearby forces pinned down, while they made another attempt to crack Andurian. This was the 4th successive attack in 18 months, and the defences were severely compromised. Despite this, they wouldn't give an inch, and managed to hold their ground until reinforcements arrived in August, turning the tables in their favour. Liao withdrew 2 months later. Despite dealing with the ComStar problem, Charles Marik still found no peace at home, as Minister of Finance Hector Lombard persisted in his efforts to withhold funding for the FWLM. He demanded that Resolution 288 be repealed and the Free Worlds League return to a more democratic system of government. The Captain General finally cracked in August 2839. He dispatched his personal guard to arrest Lombard and his allies, in flagrant violation of the Articles of Unification that had formed the League back in 2271.
There we go.
Unfortunately for Marik, Lombard's faction were able to escape the trap and fled to Helos Minor, where they set up a parliament in exile. Charles's heavy-handed approach had destroyed the last of his support within government. He was now completely alone, facing an imminent defeat. Despite the odds against him, Marik was not prepared to go quietly into the night. Early in 2840, he launched counterattacks against Graham and Oliver, with supporting raids into the Federation of Sky. A stroke of good fortune won him an easy victory on Graham 4, when in late February the Lyran commander Colonel Hendrik Grimm snapped under the pressure of having to defend this critical staging post with so little forces available to him. Grimm and his unit went AWOL, and began making for the periphery, picking up the survivors of another Lyran regiment along the way. Together, they raided storehouses on both sides of the border. Both the Free Worlds and Lyrans would place a bounty on them for their actions. The FWLM attack on Oliver was also a success for Marik, taking the planet back in mid-March. Maintaining the momentum, the Free Worlds League military struck at Zosma, Denabola, and New Earth. These attacks kept the LCAF from advancing in that region, though they were still able to seize Concord and Promised Land further along the border. The last of the Capellan advances also came in 2840, though these won them precious little in the way of territory. The defenders on New Delos held their ground when the CCAF arrived in March, though another raid on Andurian in the summer did succeed in damaging their mech production plants. Their final effort came at Assumption in August, a system that Marik had been stubbornly clinging to despite its position far beyond the borders of its realm. While they may have been able to take back control of the planet, the Capellan armed forces had overextended themselves in doing so. Trying to take advantage of the situation while they were still overwhelmed, Charles used the only fresh levies he had been able to secure funding for to launch raids on Berenson and Fact in late October.
Okay.
Unfortunately, the Green troops would not survive their first engagement, a punishing loss for a military that was struggling to stay afloat. Despite the lackluster result, Liao was spent. Trying to maintain order on the dozens of worlds they had claimed these past few years consumed all their energy. With no ability to push any further in either direction, Lorelei Liao was forced to accept that recovering Chesterton was no longer a possibility.
There we go.
The Chesterton Decree granted House Hargreaves a seat on the Prefectorate as Duke in exile, but they would likely never recover their ancestral home.
Okay.
Yoguchi Kurita had spent his first years as coordinator revitalizing the DCMS and expanding their mercenary roster with Leviathan's Wake. As a career soldier, he did not wish to give up on a chance to lead troops into battle, and so in 2840 reformed the 4th Sword of Light out of the battered remnants of the 8th. Going forwards, these would serve as his family's personal guard. Though Yoguchi's actions so far had appeased the mustard soldiery, he did make one critical mistake. Never a strong supporter of the ISF, who he either didn't trust or considered dishonourable, early in his reign he placed the entire internal security force under the command of the military. This caused quite an upset within both factions. The DCMS felt they were being spied on, whereas the ISF felt they were being unfairly slighted after loyally serving the coordinator for many generations.
Oh boy.
It was a fracture that others would seek to exploit.
Yeah.
Kurita's revitalized DCMS began moving across the Lyran border in April. A pair of thrusts pushed into both the Federation of Sky and Tamar Pact. Along the periphery border, the largest DCMS task force tried to mislead Steiner as to which planet they were heading towards by jumping from Verthandi to Chateau and then back to New Caledonia in May. First down were a battalion of the Sword of Light, who smartly made the capture of the planet's major supply and distribution hub their first objective. Once the spaceport was secured, the rest of the regiments entered atmosphere. Leading the Combine assault was the coordinator's son, Taisho Hugai Kurita,
there we go,
at the head of his father's regiment. Opposing him was Colonel Tiber Hinders of the Royal Guard, though their units would not be involved in the initial clashes. A diversionary raid was staged on Harvest, an agricultural linchpin of the region. The Razelhaig regulars met with such success that they ended up calling in reinforcements to help them secure the system. Less than 20% of the York regulars were able to escape Harvest. The survivors later disbanded. Back at the New Caledonian capital, the Royal Guards were fighting tooth and nail to hold back the DCMS. But once the Sword of Light overcame the York regulars, the odds of holding the city looked slim. Tiber's brother, Michael Hinders, broke off one of the battalions to prevent the Kuritans from being able to bring their full might to bear. But by late August, they were in retreat yet again, this time heading to the SLDF fortress known as Red Castle. It would take another 17 months to drive them out. The Lambrecht salient was one Kurita was eager to remove. With the swift nullification of the garrison's air power, the aforementioned world became the first to fall after just 3 weeks. Thorin was the complete inverse. Terrible storms downed more aerospace fighters than either side's pilots.
Oh wow.
The reduced visibility they brought with them aided the heavier Lyran mechs and hindered the lighter Combine ones.
Is it bad that I'm starting to get numb when I see these regiments just getting smoked? This is impressively bad.
When they did stumble into each other, the LCAF invariably came out on top. The Kuritan commander cut their losses, just as his Steiner counterpart on Lambrecht was doing the same. Deeper inside the Federation at Rancher, A raid on the Caledonia system resulted in the destruction of the last Mako-class corvette. It's unclear how many warships were still in existence at this point, but the only vessel in the Lyran Navy we know of was the LCS Invincible. By the end of the decade, it too would be put out to pasture when it was relocated to the capital Tharkad and decommissioned. The renewed conflict along their Spinwood border heavily disrupted Steiner's planned 2841 offensive against the Free Worlds League. Action around Tamarind had already dropped off, with the FWLM reclaiming 4 of their lost systems at the expense of only Kavanagh. The Lyrans also took Dane back in February, but after this their focus was to shift towards the Marik Commonwealth. To lead their attack in the region, they had managed to secure a contract with the 12th Star Guard, who had served with the Capellans throughout the Succession Wars up to that point. Their summer assaults began with Savannah, Remulac and Nathan, but long before they were secured in autumn, the Kuritan threat had emerged along Steiner's flank, preventing any further advances. On the Draconis Combine home front, Yoguchi Kurita's sister Rowena was named the coordinator of the People's Reconstruction effort in 2841, a post previously held by their father. Women in the Draconis Combine were frequent victims of discrimination in professional circles, especially within the military and government.
Of course.
While service was not discouraged among the lower classes, noblewomen had a very rigidly defined role at their husband's or father's side. It was very much a man's world. But the PRE, as a distinctly non-military organization, was not seen as being beyond her station as a woman. The position came with vast resources that Rowena immediately put to work.
I know, right?
Creating
71,
a second
surprise,
bureaucracy loyal exclusively to her. Within a year of this, she was making connections within the disenfranchised ISF, ultimately leading to a relationship with director Malcolm Katsuyori. She opened the PRE to his organization, improving its efficiency while giving her allies a new avenue of gathering intelligence. They in turn provided her with information she used to increase her private wealth substantially. Her aggrandizement was not perceived as a direct challenge to her older brother, since it seemed to focus solely around material gain. By all accounts, the two siblings shared a strong familial bond, and so no effort was taken to curb her activities. Yoguchi Kurita had also ordered a pair of assaults against the Federated Suns in 2841, one each against the Robinson and Woodbine operational areas. The Davian realm had been largely quiet for the past few years, busy incorporating so many conquered Capellan systems into their realm. The military had not been idle, however, long suspecting that another Kuritan attack would come. The assault came later than it otherwise might have done, as on July 11th, the former coordinator Jinjiro Kurita in his secluded cell hanged himself. A week of mourning delayed operations, but they...
X in chat. You know why. You know why.
They began immediately after. Early success was made by those units participating in the Robinson Thrust, capturing Breed, Clathandu and Royal. But the raid against the capital was an abject failure. Running into far stiffer resistance than anticipated, the DCMS withdrew after just 6 days. Towards the Outworlds, Colia became the first but ultimately only planet to change hands. Attacks on Anguilla, Bremond and Sturgis went nowhere, while the garrison at their primary objective, Tancredi 4, proved as intractable as those on Robinson. After 11 days stuck in urban combat, the Kuritan survivors withdrew. On their way out of the system, they unleashed a bioweapon that would render this vital agricultural system virtually inhospitable.
Good job, assholes. Looks like planet-wide war crimes are back on the menu, boys. Of course, yeah, because of course they did, Alice. Of course they did.
The Davian counterattack came sooner than the Draconis Combine could have imagined. In late October, they made their first moves in what would become their primary war aim for the next few years, re-establishing a Terran corridor. An invasion of 4 Kuritan planets followed. Naturally, the DCMS redeployed to deal with this new threat, but this opened them up to other intrusions along a much-neglected front. Chancellor Liao ordered her troops to advance into Kuritan space, taking for herself Anka, Keen, New Florence, Ronal, and Tybalt, all of which the Dragon had pried away from them early in the 29th century. This threw Davian plans into disarray, as those were systems that they too coveted. Assembling a large task force, they decided to strike instead at one of the Confederation's cornerstones, the planet Northwind.
That's not gonna go well for you. That's not gonna go well. That is not gonna go. Oh, no, 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 no. This is a bad idea. You done fucked up.
4 mech regiments arrived in November, escorted by a pair.
Hold on a second. Hold on a second. He's got the wrong soundtrack right now. All right, let's go. Here we go. Ready? Here we go.
Head of warships. 3 lighter propellant vessels opposed them, but the loss of CCS Major O caused the other 2 indispensable.
Scotland forever! Seriously? You're going to invade Northwind? Home of the Northwind Highlanders? Are you on crack? Are you seriously on crack?
Indispensable warships to withdraw.
Hold on.
Warships. 3 lighter Capellan vessels opposed them, but the loss of CCS Major O caused the other 2 indispensable warships to withdraw. The way had been cleared. Though the Northwind Highlanders fielded an unmatched 6 regiments, only 2 were ever home at one time. The rest were sorely needed elsewhere. Most of the fighting would take place within the Cairngorm Mountains, while the Blue Star Irregulars moved to take control of Cromarty City. The canyons allowed the Highlanders to mitigate their numbers disadvantage, but as the AFFS closed relentlessly, they realized that neither did the canyons allow for a way out. Both regiments were destroyed utterly, fighting to the bitter end. Capellan propaganda cast the Davian invaders as barbarians, and soon the rest of the mercenary brigade were calling for retribution. Lorelli denied them, however, unable to spare such a powerful frontline unit for a non-essential objective, though she promised them that one day the Northwind Highlanders would return home.
That's bad. Species! Thank you, bud. I appreciate it. 5 gifted memberships. Thank you, bud. Massive. Yeah, the Highlanders actually lost outnumbered as they were. That's okay. That's okay. Bagpipes are the only musical instrument that is also a weapon of war. Factually incorrect there, Kenneth. Factually incorrect. The clarinet was made by monks as a club. Not a joke. Actual thing. Dude. Thank you, Species 316. Thank you so much.
Davian completed their conquest of Mallory's World and Ozawa, then secured Mara and New Roads in the new year. Further spinward, they had equal success. The AFFS worked alongside the new War Griffin's mercenary cadre to take Bryceland, Medron, Niles, and Whittington, but these were the only planets to change hands on this front in 2842.
Yes, Cleodora.
In the Freewells League, Charles Marik could feel the noose tightening around his neck. In the past few months, Liao had taken Procyon and Steiner a further 5 systems.
Much appreciated, 316.
A despairing Captain General was heading for what he believed would be the final battle of his time in office. Charles had become persona non grata within his own parliament on Atreus.
That sucks.
And so took what ragtag forces he could muster to the hyper-industrial world of Irion for a hopeless defense. He was reinforced by Harlan Allison at the head of his premier Fusiliers of Oriente brigade, but the odds of turning back the approaching Lyran onslaught seemed slim.
Yep.
Harlan too was resigned to his fate. He had lost both his sons during the ComStar War, an only daughter to a tragic accident. He seemed content to go out fighting alongside his lord and master. Judgment Day arrived on January 5th. Despite being outnumbered 3-1, Marik and Allison held their ground around the Irion Technologies headquarters and factory. Battle mechs fresh off the assembly lines were pressed into service only to be destroyed hours later. It was a brutal affair, with all the worst hallmarks of urban warfare. Kirin River, the planetary capital, was surrounded by a massive 20-meter wall, with another around Old Town at its center. Steiner breached the outer defenses early, meaning the two sides were penned in between the fortifications.
Oh my god.
On February 9th, the Captain General was ambushed and his Orion mech destroyed. He ejected moments before detonation and was recovered by reserves before he could be captured. This was small comfort to him, as the Lyrans had established a beachhead within Old Town. The day before the battle commenced, an important development had occurred back on Atreus. The Duke of Oriente had sent his brother Kendall to meet with one of the few Marik loyalists remaining, Marin Ladislaw. Also lending his support to what would become known as the Ladislaw Amendment was Duke Jonathan Humphreys.
Every single time I see this picture, I'm making fun of it. That face you make when... Yeah, knife fight in a phone booth is so heavily accurate there, point man. That face you make when indeed it is the Muffin Man.
By this point, Hector Lombard's coalition had collapsed into bickering among themselves, meaning there was no united opposition to the bill that would restore military funding and raise fresh levies to relieve the FWLM on Irion. Facing the very real prospect that the Freewells League was about to be overrun, many MPs turned back to Marik. Voting on the crucial legislation concluded with a tally of 213 for to 185 against.
True.
Help was on the way. It arrived just as the Lyrans were about to land the killing blow. On March 19th, 5 regiments appeared in system aboard hastily chartered merchant freighters and headed for the Captain General. Their initial ferocity helped them win the Battle of Kirin River, but Steiner still controlled the rest of the planet. The Lyrans were suffering from heavy attrition, but the FWLM reinforcements were poorly organized and inexperienced.
Yay.
However, when word reached them that other liberation efforts had reclaimed Bonaire and Tania Borealis and were now heading that way, the Archon realized that Irion was a lost cause and ordered the survivors to pull back. This was the turning point. Charles Marik and the Freewells League had survived their darkest hour. They would soon remind their aggressors that the Eagle United was a force to be reckoned with.
Kenyon Marik smiles smugly in his grave. Nah, he ain't the Eagle. He ain't the Eagle. X in chat for snoring dogs.
On July 4th, 2842, First Prince of the Federated Sons, Paul Davian, died unexpectedly of heart failure after over 40 years in office.
That sucks.
His accomplishments and legacy are almost unparalleled. During the First Succession War, he rallied a realm teetering on the edge of oblivion and pushed their aggressor, who was but a single step from landing the killing blow on their capital, all the way back to their borders. During the Second Succession War, he had made incredible gains along the Capellan front, and time and again frustrated efforts by the Kuritan enemy to snatch away vulnerable systems. Politically, he had cemented his family's dominance over the nation in ways that none of his predecessors had managed. He had done so without creating antipathy within his government, a testament to his excellent leadership skills. Paul Davian is surely in contention for being the finest leader the Federated Suns has ever seen. Stepping into his massive shoes was his son Michael Davian.
Okay.
So many times in history, a strong ruler has been followed by a weak one.
Joy.
But Michael was a capable statesman in his own right.
Okay, good.
His priorities did differ from his father, however, and the renewed effort to create a Terran corridor as begun by Paul the previous year was put on hold while the Federated Suns transitioned. One of his chief concerns was the rapid decline in advanced technology. Already the achievements of the Star League were being talked about with reverence less than a century after its fall.
Oh boy.
Reversing that trend became Michael's pet project during his time as First Prince, and we can still see his impact on Federated Suns universities today.
Is that a wizard?
Little did he know that for every piece of technology he saved, Karpov's ComStar was erasing 10 more.
Yeah, Board Cube, that's what I feel.
At New Caledonia, the battle between Steiner and Kurita was into its second year. The Star League fortress Redcastle was holding strong, but the loss of their mountain airbase in October planted the seed of doubt within Colonel Tiber Hinders. The sudden defeat was so absolute, he suspected betrayal from within.
Nice.
Redcastle was eventually overcome in January, and his next moves were all countered immediately, confirming in his mind that they had been sold out. He ordered the Royal Guards to split up, and the unit fought as guerrillas for the next few years. In the Free Worlds League, House Marik was beginning the long road to recovery. Their victory at Irion had been a decisive turning point, not just for the nation, but for the planet itself. Irion Battlemechs Unlimited may have lost more than 75% of their production lines, but the rest of the world had been thoroughly despoiled.
Nice.
The corporate overlords were at the center of rebuilding efforts, and the system would become an independent province under their governance later in the Second Succession War. The FWLM was on the counterattack, riding the wave that took them to Malungra and Trellisane in the second half of 2842, then on to Nokatunga, Malazan and Alula Borealis in 2843. In the Terran corner, they also made headway against the Lyrans on Acubens and Connaught, though their remaining 3 targets turned into protracted slogs. Each League invasion force was eventually driven off over the next 3 years. A personal tragedy for Captain General Charles Marik occurred on Dunne, where his son William was killed in action during the fight to liberate the system.
That sucks.
The campaign would press on regardless, with Charles and his descendants frequently leading from the front. Leading from the front was not something that was in Michael Davian's wheelhouse. In fact, his interest in military matters was largely absent.
So he wasn't even a Hearts of Iron 4 player at this point.
This could have created problems, as the head of state was also the head of the armed forces. To overcome this shortcoming, he appointed his experienced uncle, Peter Davian, to the new position of Prime Marshal, bestowing on him all the authority traditionally wielded by the First Prince.
There you go!
A strong family bond existed between the two, so there was no fear of betrayal. Peter had essentially taken on the role his own uncle, Thomas Holder Davian, had held during Paul's administration.
Okay.
Michael instead focused his energies on making peace proposals to his neighbours. He understood full well that neither state would be willing to end the war at present, and neither would his own people. but local pieces allowed for some recovery and reconstruction on worlds that were on the brink of collapse. His decision to forego further aggression on the Combine border did not please everyone, and he narrowly avoided assassination by sniper in only his second year. "2843 marked the commencement of a renewed campaign against the Capellan Confederation. Championed by Duke Harlan Allison of the Grand Duchy of Oriente, La Reconquista began in March with a raid to destroy the Battletech factories on Bryant.
Oh, that's a name. That's a damn name. That is a hell of a name. We're about to see some grade A fuckery here.
And the capture of Second Chance and Shepao. They would strengthen their position in the new year with 2 flanking attacks, one against the Andurian commonality and another into the Tikonov commonality. The Marik militia sent to reclaim Bernardo believed that they had an easy task ahead of them, as Safe reported that Justine's grenadiers had abandoned the planet back in 2838 to reinforce Susano. In actuality, the Capellans had returned soon after and hidden their camp among the planet's polar ice caps. A whole company of light mechs were captured in a surprise attack before the Liao troops lifted off-world with their bounty. They would
F in chat for Liao, because anytime I see a name like that attached to a military campaign, it's going to be painful to witness.
Return to cause more mayhem, but only as a layover on their journey deep into the Free Worlds League.
Oh god, they're going after Wisconsin.
Base on Wisconsin was their primary target.
An R&R base? That's a dick move.
They wiped out virtually the entire 8th Marik militia before they themselves were destroyed. In a coreward direction, Archon Marcus Steiner had been touring the front line throughout 2843, hoping to boost morale and shore up defences. A busy schedule kept him hopping from star to star, but his voyage was abandoned when he contracted a virulent strain of meningitis at Lorik. He was rushed back to the capital to undergo treatment, but while still en route, lapsed into a coma on November 24th. By the time he arrived home in February, the Estates General was in disarray. The unconscious Marcus was still notionally in charge, but he was clearly unable to perform his duties. General of the Armies Miles Kempek stepped forward in the interim to ensure the Commonwealth was adequately protected.
Kempek? Kempek. Kempek. Anybody a Trekkie in here? Anybody a Trekkie? Anybody? Yeah.
The Tamar Pact was looking particularly vulnerable with so much focus along the Marik border. The previous year, the LCAF had hired the Tamar pikemen to defend the capital, while a few jumps away, the Antares Scorpions would form in 2844 to further secure the region. The government, meanwhile, was trying to decide who to pronounce Archon designate.
Archon.
2 names rose to the forefront. The first was Marcus's brother, Claudius Steiner, an experienced commander and social charmer, but also somewhat aloof, with no strong political allies at court. His rival was Marcus's wife, Melissa Nin. While she had many friends among the nobility, she also lacked political acumen. Crucially though, there was a power block within the Estates General, led by Speaker of the Assembly Harlan Dinesen, that felt they could more easily influence her and thus exert greater control over the Commonwealth. This stalemate at the Triad allowed for the Free Worlds League to recover another 3 systems, including the hotly contested world of Bella, over which half a dozen battles had been fought since the fall of the Star League.
Yep.
At the height of the leadership debate that raged throughout 2844, The Estates General received a missive from Claudius himself that would send shockwaves across Tharkad. Harlan was able to use Steiner's words against him to galvanize enough representatives into supporting his candidate.
I am neither humble nor courteous, so will not couch my intent with flowery or eloquent phrases. Instead, hear me plain. I will kill anyone who challenges my claim to the Archonship, and I will torture anyone who supports any of my rivals for the throne. I hope I've made myself understood. Yes, you have.
In December, Melissa Nin narrowly came out ahead to be named the first non-Steiner Archon in over 4 centuries.
Oh boy.
Her position was confirmed on March 13th, 2845, when Marcus Steiner passed away after 16 months in a coma. Unfortunately, she proved as weak-willed as some had feared and others had hoped for.
Oh boy.
Denison and his supporters reveled in their newfound power while neglecting the defense of the realm.
Oh, damn
Their disinterest in running the war for the Commonwealth eventually forced Claudius's hand. He arrived on August 20th with the intention of deposing his sister-in-law.
Oh boy.
A brief mech battle between 2 regiments of the Lyran Guards, Steiner's 2nd and Nin's 3rd, saw Claudius the victor. Most of the Estates General now looked forward to a return to normality. They were quickly disabused of that notion by Steiner's harsh justice.
His name is Claudius. Claudius. I know ComStar has been eliminating knowledge, but that should set alarm bells off.
Executing Melissa Nin and Harlan Denison for treason the next day.
There we go.
But it was the new Archon's second act that left them truly astonished.
Oh boy.
Claudius disbanded the Estates General indefinitely.
There we go.
Over the last few years, the Prime Marshal of the...
This is how democracy dies. To the sound of an atlas stepping on your face.
AFFS had managed to more or less re-establish the Federated Sun's vital Terran corridor. They were only blocked from completing the route when Liao secured Fomalhaut across that path. However, this was not achieved without losses elsewhere. Peter Davian was essentially fighting with one arm tied behind his back, as his nephew tried his best to de-escalate the conflict. It was a noble goal, but one that would prove costly. Unable to launch cross-border raids to unsettle the DCMS, Kurita exploited their inaction by
I am the Senate,
driving their forces onwards into the Draconis March. For the second time in his short reign, First Prince Michael Davian was the target of an assassination attempt in 2845. His uncle Peter had just led the AFFS to victory at Avigate and Sadar along the Cyan-St. Ives commonality border, but Michael again requested that he scale back his aggression in light of his expanded efforts to reach a peace with Liao.
Alice, did you actually just ask if an Atlas can get the clap? X in chat to nuke Alice for that Selesnya garbage.
However, Chancellor Lorelli had continually rebuffed his proposal so far, still bitter that her own mother's efforts had been spat on by his predecessor. The Peace Prince, as Michael had become known, was not acting altogether altruistically. In fact, it's clear that Davian felt very self-important, perhaps even delusionally so.
Oh great.
His terms repeatedly called for Kurita and Liao to recognize him as the First Lord of a reformed Star League. Such an incredibly out-of-touch demand would have been rejected out of hand, likely sabotaging any chances of a lasting peace from being established.
Oh my god. Dude, he's like, guys, I want to talk peace. I want to be serious. By the way, I'm your leader. The fuck? I don't know.
The Wellesley counteroffensive was in full swing by 2845. They fully exploited the political instability within the Lyran Commonwealth to wrestle back control of 7 worlds. Much of the heavy lifting.
Christian, here we go. Anakin, you're going down a path I can't follow. My mech is too big. Use the AC-20. I find you... Dude, seriously, why? I find your lack of faith disturbing. Jump jets on an Atlas, let's go. Anakin would seriously be in an urban mech. Talking about sand.
Lifting.
I'm just saying it would have... leave it alone. I'm an ass and a dork, and I know this. Leave it alone. Thank you, Christian. I'm going to atone for my sins later. I will headbutt a desk at least 4 times in penance.
Done by their 2 newest mercenary regiments, Landers Lancers and Reds Grenadiers. La Reconquista succeeded in taking another 6 systems from the Capellans. While the Confederation was definitely on the back foot, they made the Free Worlds League pay a high price for every planet. Orenson was one of the bloodiest battles of the war. Oriente's advance was thrown into disarray when Liao struck back at New Delos. On October 2nd, Duke Harlan Allison, one of the finest mech warriors of his generation, with over 127 kills to his name, was killed in action. But this was just the first tragedy to befall the ruling family.
Because he was a real one. He stood beside Marik and ignored all the BS. He really, really did. He didn't stand for it. He was like, look, stuff's going on. Stuff's going on. I need to put aside everything and stand with Marik right now. Because otherwise things are going downhill. He was a real one.
Family of Oriente that month, as 2 days later, on October 4th, his
Lord
brother
Gar.
Kendall Allison was assassinated on Atreus. It's unclear whether the 2 events are connected. Word of the Duke's death had not even reached the capital when Kendall was shot. We don't know the exact details of the New Delos raid, but unless there was a convoluted plot to ensure Harlan did not survive the battle, it seems the timing was coincidence.
Yeah.
What we do know is that the Marquis's wife refused to serve as regent, foregoing her twin daughter's birthright on their behalf. It's possible that she was under pressure from enemies of House Marik, looking to rob the Captain General of support in Parliament. The calls to raise Blair Hallis, a mech warrior from the Ducal Guard, to House Allison's position are also somewhat suspect. By all accounts, he was apolitical, someone who would either take little part in affairs of state or could be manipulated by those around him. If all this was an elaborate scheme to undermine the Captain General, the great irony is that it was all ultimately futile. Blair's grandson would later marry one of Kendall's daughters, uniting the 2 families, and House Hallis has been a stalwart of Marik support in Parliament ever since.
Well, good job.
Early in 2846, Prime Marshal Peter Davian's limited campaign against the Capellans succeeded in taking Cotocalo, but aside from a deep raid onto Carver 5 to strike at Blandford's Grenadiers, this was as far as Michael allowed the AWFS to advance. A second failed bomb hit in successive years perhaps finally snapped the First Prince out of his fantasy and made him take notice that the armed forces of the Federated Suns were on the verge of mutiny. It might already have been too late to stop it. In May, Peter Davian was approached by a cabal of high-ranking officers. With his approval, they would step in to remove Michael from the throne and place Peter there in turn. The Prime Marshal was incensed by the suggestion. The schemers were turned away and threatened with dire actions should they continue in their efforts. He went on record soon after, publicly affirming his support of his nephew, but ultimately, the AWFS had made their point. Whether Peter and Michael ever communicated about the near revolt isn't clear, but the First Prince abandoned his peace proposal soon after, and charged his uncle with seeking a military victory for House Davian.
Yeah, that's a good idea, buddy.
After taking power within the Lyran Commonwealth, Claudius Steiner's psychopathic tendencies came to the forefront. A reign of terror is probably the most accurate way to describe his time in office.
Oh boy.
The LIC, especially the Loki agents, would spend their days rounding up anyone who had displeased the Archon.
And now we go from, yeah, we're at full Stalin levels now.
Those poor unfortunate individuals had an equal chance of being thrown in a cell to rot, forced to participate in horrific blood sports, or invited to a lavish dinner where Claudius would raise a toast to their good health. Miles Kempek, meanwhile, had the Lyran Commonwealth Armed Forces on lockdown. Helping to bolster the front line were the 12th Star Guard, who had formed the Rat Frags 1 year earlier, then Lescouflers Landsknechts in 2846, meaning they now surpassed the Northwind Highlanders to become the largest mercenary brigade in existence. The LCAF expanded their contract to include all 5 regiments. Claudius Steiner was proving to be a terrible liability for the nation's defense. Because of this, the LIC was maintaining a watchful eye on their Spinwood neighbor, certain that Kurita would soon take advantage of the situation. The Bondians trained a number of courtesans to infiltrate the private households of the powerful and wealthy, hoping to glean any information that could give them forewarning of an invasion.
Oh boy.
The most successful of these was the Norn agent known as Snowfire, who in time would catch the eye of the coordinator himself. But Snowfire, or Denise Vanderham if that was her real name, was a double agent. She was in contact with the head of SAFE's Luthian station. The information...
Bro! SAFE is actually doing something decent. It would make her a triple agent M101.
She relayed back to the LIC may have allowed them to counter Kuritan raids, but it exaggerated the risk on that front. This allowed Marik an easier time of things when they launched lightning strikes at a Crux and Miser to disrupt the LCAF's activities, and another deep raid to Furillo, which caused much destruction. It was not, however, enough to prevent their attempt to retake Dixie from failing. Liao might have hoped that the end of the noble House Allison would bring a halt to advances on that front, but Hallis proved just as capable of continuing the offensive. The CCAF doggedly held on to Wazan, but Harzafeld and Singhai would fall in 2846. Deep raids into the Confederation, striking at Second Try and even Harlock beyond Cyan, gave the Strategios little choice but to order their forces to shelter in place, knowing another attack could come at any location. The FWLM took advantage of this by launching another assault on Assumption in November. It was a short campaign, only lasting a month, but a very costly one. 40% of the troops dispatched to take the world would not return. The next year, House Humphreys was seeking retribution for the attacks on their ancestral home a decade prior. They launched their own raid against the Andurian Commonality's capital, and also recaptured Mozero.
Okay.
In 2847, Charles Marik would make his first return to Atreus since he departed for Irion half a decade earlier. He had left in disgrace, but returned to find a newfound
Safe. Stupidity accepted, failure imminent.
Support at home. The Captain General was well on his way to recovering the territory lost during the ComStar War, a remarkable turnaround. He would cement his popularity in Parliament the following year by lifting the ban on so-called restricted items, usually just luxuries the ruling class craved.
Of course, of course.
With the new freedom granted him by the First Prince, Prime Marshal Peter Davian expanded AFFS operations to include the Draconis Combine Front.
There we go.
With an increased budget, he was able to hire the mercenary battalion Quinn's Quads to help with future actions in the march. Focusing on recovering worlds lost to the Dragon, Roe was the first to be welcomed back into the fold, then Crossing and Glenmora in 2848.
Yay!
Simultaneously, he continued to drive his forces into the St. Ives Commonality, expanding the Capellan March with another pair of systems. For the past 7 years, Colonel Tiber Hinders had been resisting the occupation of New Caledonia.
Oh my god.
His troops had scattered into the hills to fight as guerrillas, making life hell for the garrison. The Sword of Light had long since departed, but the Coordinator's son, Hugai Kurita, still remained on world. Tiber and his brother Michael Hinders had called on the population to fight, and they did so in great numbers. Roughly 40,000 New Caledonians would be casualties of the vicious campaign, but by 2848, both sides knew that the resistance was doomed, and in July, the last of the Royal Guard were taken prisoner. There was no civility between the two commanders when Hugai met Tiber, but the Kuritan did at least offer satisfaction in a matter that had long weighed on Colonel Hinders' mind. Earlier in the campaign, the Royal Guards had been betrayed from within. Hugai offered a chance to face this turncoat in battle, which Tiber accepted. The two were loaded into a pair of mechs and faced off outside the capital city. Both proved exceptionally skilled, as to be expected from members of the elite Royal Guards, but ultimately Tiber won out. Approaching the ruined Thunderbolt, he found his brother Michael's body within. Hugai executed the broken colonel moments later, along with the rest of his staff.
Dude, why? Kuritans doing Kuritan things.
Remains open to debate whether Michael was the spy, or if there even was one. Certainly it could be argued that the resistance should have fallen apart much sooner had there actually been treachery. A run of bad luck could easily have accounted for their misfortune back in 2843. Hugai proved how villainously manipulative he could be with his next act, so it's quite possible Michael Hinders was made the same deal as his brother, a chance to get even. Their battle to the death was for more than just Hugai's amusement. A recording of the duel was dispatched to Archon Claudius Steiner, a great lover of senseless violence himself. This cruel joke would be Kurita's undoing, as the mad successor lord swore bloody vengeance. He ordered the LIC to carry out Operation Praying Mantis, the assassination.
Is Kurita begging for mercy in Farsi right now? Because I got a feeling we're about to get really fucking proportional around here. I'm just saying. This is going to be a proportional response.
Of the Kuritan family. The situation on the Marik-Liao border had stagnated into a series of costly raids. A strike at Altora in 2848 was bound to result in retaliation, which came at Ascension the next year. On planet were two of Charles's descendants, his son Garth and grandson Michael. It had become common for the family to take an active role on the front lines, but their safety was very much at risk at these exposed positions, as had been demonstrated when Michael's own father William was killed 6 years earlier. Using her latest mercenary acquisitions, Narhol's Raiders and Nai Tuka, to cover her flank, Chancellor Lorelli-Liao ordered the Northwind Highlanders to seize the planet at any cost, and if the Marik family were to suffer a personal loss at the same time, so much the better.
Oh wow.
After failing to take out the two Marik heirs conventionally, the Seacaf pulled back and launched a nuclear weapon at their position, killing both instantly.
Well, there you go.
Ascension was reclaimed once and for all soon after. Whatever Lorelli hoped to gain from this act, the consequences should have been obvious. A Freewells League vessel jumped into the heart of the Confederation, took up position over Capella itself, and fired its nuclear payload at the planet below. This was the last time in history that either successor state would deploy nuclear weapons, though both still jealously guard enormous stockpiles.
We have just seen the FAFO scale in effect. Oh boy, here comes the madhouse of this shit.
In February 2849, Coordinator Yuguchi Kurita arrived on Tishamingo to personally lead the defense of this important planet.
Yeah, Hannibal, a little striking a nerve.
Despite belonging to the Federated Suns throughout the era of the Star League, the population had turned strongly in favor of the Draconis Combine during their many years of rulership in the First Succession War.
Okay.
Escorting him to the planet were his Sword of Light and 3 conventional regiments, adding their strength to the 6 militia regiments already on world. When Peter Davian arrived in March, he did so with an overwhelming force. 4 battle mech and 16 conventional units gave them a 2-to-1 advantage, 4-to-1 in mech disparity. Though they put up a fanatical resistance for a time, the Sword of Light was completely eradicated in April.
Wow.
The subjugation of Tishamingo was complete 2 months later. But here the Davian intelligence agencies failed them, as the presence of the Coordinator on world remained unknown. Yuguchi faded into the countryside, hoping to raise an army that could overthrow the garrison once the Prime Marshal's main strength moved on. He didn't have to wait long, as Peter's task force jumped to their next targets within the month, achieving similarly crushing victories there. On May 8, 2849, the people of the Lyran Commonwealth collectively breathed a deep sigh of relief when Archon Claudius Steiner suffered a coronary episode and died before medical aid could arrive.
I wonder why he suddenly suffered a coronary episode. I wonder why this occurred. Anybody have an idea? Does anybody have an idea? X in chat if you have an idea why. I mean, I'm not sure, I'm just guessing, but...
Some say that it was deliberately late in coming. Claudius had frequented hospitals during his time in office, and the Lyran doctors resented being forced to keep many poor individuals alive to suffer through ever more extreme torture methods during the Mad Steiner's reign of terror. Other rumors suggest that his mother forced him to drink poison, or he was smothered by his wife.
Oh.
Whatever the reason, he was dead, and his 8-year-old daughter Elizabeth was far too young to take his place. Rebecca Morgan, Claudius's partner, stepped in to bring some semblance of order back to the Commonwealth, beginning by reconvening the Estates General.
Welcome back,
They agreed that a regent would be needed to safeguard the realm until Elizabeth came of age, but there was no consensus on who that should be. To avoid a repeat of Melissa Nin's disastrously short reign, a compromise was found, and on October 13th, a trio of candidates were elected to form a triumvirate. This council consisted of Speaker of the Assembly Henri de Calidor and the Duchesses Eliza Atten and Rebecca Morgan herself.
Okay.
Over at Luthien, the Coordinator's apparent death had sent shockwaves through the Imperial City. Upon his return to the Combine, the DCMS commander had reported that Yuguchi had been killed in action on Tishamingo. There was also the small matter of the Sword of Light being down a regiment, but the 8th could be fairly easily reformed. After the death of his firstborn in a battle mech accident some years earlier, Yuguchi had not named an heir. Hugai would have been next in line, but he was not present at court at this vital moment.
Oh.
Even if he had been, it's unlikely that he would have had the support to supplant his aunt Rowena, who stepped forward as the acting coordinator until the nobility could settle the matter. Rumours were circulating that a Kuritan operative was fomenting a rebellion back on Tishamingo. Davian was trying to stamp out the unrest, but feared that they would soon be facing a large uprising. Their priorities shifted drastically when word got out that the supposed ISF agent inciting the population to violence was none other than Yuguchi Kurita himself. Davian immediately gave orders to move more troops to the planet, but he was beaten to the punch by the coordinator's sister, Rowena. She had her suspicions that her brother was still alive, and so had already dispatched a relief force before the truth had come out. A quartet of DCMS regiments made landfall in August, to find that much of the population had taken up arms in support of Kurita. Before the AFFS reinforcements could arrive, Yuguchi was heading out of the system for good. Tishamingo would become one of the bloodiest battles of the Second Succession War, surpassed only by those rare instances where WMDs struck population centers. Restoring order to the chaos that had broken out upon the Coordinator's successful escape would ultimately cost the lives of 3 million civilians, many of whom had willingly given their lives in service to the Draconis Combine.
And this is a good stopping point for us right here. Guys, we have seen quite a bit tonight. We have seen quite a bit tonight. Quite simply put, this is the worst. This is the worst, honestly. ComStar has pretty much killed technology, killed the advancement of humanity. And now, above anything else, I can see why the clans just raffle stomped the inner sphere for quite some time. And this happened all under the nose of everyone when it should have been obvious. And the only reason that no one really figured it out is quite simply because they were too busy hating on each other. They were too busy hating on each other. We saw the insanity of Claudius Steiner. What happens when ComStar turns off your services and demands you pay your bill? The Capellans are currently in the find out phase of this war. And the Free Worlds League has taken a hell of a beating that they're recovering from. Kurita did Kurita things. No big surprise there. We're sorry, this planet has been disconnected. Yeah, pretty much. I can see why you guys said the Second War was worse. From a material and simply a war footing standpoint, the amount of regiments lost in this is going to outstrip the first by a high measure. The fighting has become absolutely brutal. And like regiments are just simply dropping like flies. Like regiments are simply dropping like flies. There's not enough jump ships to freight everyone around. There are less civilian deaths though, Christian. That is true. There are less civilian deaths. What ComStar did though was pretty much, in terms of the amount of technology lost, it brought the inner sphere comparatively from the information age back to the Industrial Revolution in terms of how bad the Industrial Revolution was. Cell phones. That's how bad it has gotten. Yes, 71, a lot less glassing and gassing, but still very ugly. Like, it has, the military casualties are going to be absolutely insane. I'm just saying. Oh my god. Warpugs, I'm loving this. I'm absolutely loving this. We're going to come back for Battletech Tuesday in the end of the second Succession War, either this weekend or the following Battletech Tuesday. And to be quite honest with you, I am not sure nobody is winning this. In the first war, I could easily say that Kurita came out on top. I could easily say Kurita wound up coming out on top. In this war, no one is winning. No one is winning at all. It's just a matter of who's going to lose the least. So far, the people who have lost the least have been the Davians and the Steiners. But that could very easily change here. That could excessively easily change here. The Free Worlds League at this point, if I could say anybody is the biggest loser, it will be the Free Worlds League. My thoughts on the conclusion are going to be something. The word of Blake is winning. Oh, yeah. Warpugs, I'm going to head out from here. Thank you guys for joining me. Make sure you hit the like button before you take off. And I'll catch you guys next time.